Hi, everybody. I can't get any sleep. So this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? I got a kitty cuddle over here. I got Ethan. And then I have Morgan. They're going to come join me. So because of my situation, I can't get any sleep. I'm freaking out internally. And knowing that there are some bills that are going to not get paid, I don't know if they're going to shut off my internet, my electric, heat, and all that other fun stuff. So I want to get in as many videos as I can so that the knowledge is spread, because I care and this is my mission. So without further ado, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, share if you dare. Today, I'm going to read The Occult Anatomy of Man by Manly P. Hall. It's a very interesting book. So The Occult Anatomy of Man, Part 1, The Human Body and Symbolism. In Scripture, we are told that God made man in his own image. It is stated not only in the Christian Bible, but also in the holy writings of nearly all enlightened people. The Jewish patriarchs taught that the human body was the microcosm, or a little cosmos, made in the image of the macrocosm, or the great cosmos. This analogy between the finite and the infinite is said to be one of the keys by the aid of which the secrets of Holy Writ are unlocked. There is no doubt that the Old Testament is a physiological and anatomical textbook to those capable of reading it from a scientific viewpoint. The functions of the human body, the attributes of the human mind, and the qualities of the human soul have been personified by the wise men of the ancient world, and a great drama has been built around their relationships to themselves and to each other. To the great Egyptian demigod, Hermes, the human race owes its concept of the law of analogy. The great Hermetic axiom was, that which is above is like unto that which is below, and that which is below is like unto that which is above. The religions of the ancient world were also based upon nature worship, which in a degenerated form has survived to our own clay as phallicism. The worship of the parts and functions of the human body began in the later Lemurian period. During the Atlantean epoch, this religion gave place to sun worship, but the new faith incorporated into it doctrines, many of the rituals and symbols of the previous belief. The building of temples in the form of the human body is a custom common to all peoples. The tabernacle of the Jews, the great Egyptian temple of Karnak, the religious structures of the Hawaiian priests, and the Christian churches laid out in the form of the cross. The examples of this practice, if the human body were laid out with the arms spread in the shape of any of these buildings, it would be found that the high altar would occupy the same relative position in the building that the brain occupies in the human body. All the priests of the ancient world were anatomists. They recognized that all the functions of nature were reproduced in miniature in the human body. They therefore used man as the textbook, teaching their disciples that to understand man was to understand the universe. These wise men believed that every star in the heavens, every element in the earth, every function in nature was represented by a corresponding center, pole, or activity within the human body. This correlation between nature without and the nature of man within, which was concealed from the multitudes, formed the secret teachings of the ancient priestcraft. Religion in Atlantis and Egypt was taken much more seriously than it is today. It was the very life of these peoples. The priests had complete control over the millions of ignorant men and women who had been taught since childhood that these robed and bearded patriarchs were direct messengers from God. And it was believed that any disobedience to the commands of the priests would bring down upon the offender's head the wrath of the Almighty. The temple demanded for its maintenance upon its secret wisdom, which gave it priests control over certain powers of nature and made them vastly superior in wisdom and understanding to the laity whom they controlled. These wise ones realized that there was a great deal more involved in religion than that chanting of matrums and the singing of hymns. They realized that the path of salvation could be walked successfully only by those who practical scientific knowledge of the occult function of their own bodies. The anatomical symbolism which they evolved in order to perpetuate this understanding has come down to the modern Christianity. But the keys to it apparently have been lost. It is a tragic situation for religionists that they are surrounded by hundreds of symbols which they cannot understand. But it is still sadder that they have even forgotten that these symbols ever had any meaning other than the foolish interpretations which themselves have concocted. Oh my goodness. I know. There's a lot of people here that are going, what? Brilliant, man. The idea prevalent in the minds of Christians that their faith is the one and only true inspired doctrine and that it came parentless into the world is unreasonable in the extreme. A study on comparative religions proves beyond doubt that Christianity has begged, borrowed, or stolen its philosophies and concepts from the religions and philosophies of the ancient and medieval pagan worlds. Yes. Among the religious symbols and allegories which belong to the world long ago before the coming of Christianity are a few to which would like to call your attention. The following Christian symbols and concepts are of pagan origin. The Christian cross comes from Egypt and India. The triple mitre from the faith of the Mithrics. The shepherd's crook from the Hermetic mysteries and Greece. The Immaculate Conception from India. The Transfiguration from Persia. And the Trinity from the Brahmins. The Virgin Mary as the Mother of God is found in a dozen different faiths. There are over 20 crucified world saviors. The church steeple is an adaptation of Egyptian obelisks and pyramids, while the Christian devil is the Egyptian typhoon with certain modifications. The deeper one goes into the problem. The more he realizes that there is nothing new under the sun. A truly sincere study of the Christian faith proves beyond all doubt that it is the evolutionary outgrowth of primitive doctrines. There is an evolution in religion as well as in physical form. If we accept and incorporate into our doctrines the religious symbolism of nearly 40 peoples, it behooves us to understand, at least in part, the meaning of the myths and allegories which we borrow, lest we be more ignorant than those from whom we secure them. That's really true. This brochure is devoted to the problem of expanding the relationship existing between the symbolism of the ancient priests and the occult functions of the human body. We must first understand that all sacred writings are supposed to be sealed with 7 seals. In other words, it requires 7 complete interpretations to understand fully the meaning of these ancient philosophic revelations, which we have liked to call Holy Writ. Scripture is not intended to be historical. Those who understand the literal meaning understand the least of its meaning. It is a well-known fact that Shakespeare, for dramatic reasons, brought together in his plays characters who had actually lived hundreds of years apart. But Shakespeare was not writing history, he was penning drama. The same is true of the Bible. Scripture leaves historians hopelessly involved in self-contradictory chronological tables, where the majority of historians will remain until the judgment day. Scripture furnishes excellent subject matter for the debates and also ground for hair splitting over the meaning of terms and probable locations of unknown cities. Many of the biblical landmarks now pointed out by guides were named hundreds of years after the birth of Christ by pilgrims who suspected them of occupying sites somewhere near those mentioned in the Bible. All these may prove convincing to some, but to the thinker, it is conclusive evidence that history is the least important part of Scripture. When the Empress Helena, mother of Constantine the Great, visited Jerusalem in 326 AD, she discovered that not only all traces of Christianity had already been lost, but that a temple dedicated to the goddess Venus stood on the hill now, accepted as the Mount Calvary. Less than 400 years after the death of Christ, there was apparently no one in the Holy Land who had ever heard of him. This does not necessarily imply that he never lived, but it certainly does indicate that the halo of miracles and supernatural atmosphere with which modern Christianity envelopes him are largely mythological. Like all other religions, the Christian faith accumulated a weird collection of fantastic legends, which are as its own worst enemies, for they have taken the simple moralistic of Nazareth, the man who loved his fellow creatures, and built around him a superstructure of idolatry, which loves no one and serves only itself. As Buddha in India merely reformed the Brahmin concepts of his day, so Jesus reshaped the faith of Israel and gave to his disciples and the world a doctrine based upon that which had gone before him, but remodeled to meet the needs of the people who surrounded him and the problems which confronted the Jewish nation. The Essenes, who educated Jesus, were of Egyptian or Islanu origin, and his faith incorporated the best of that which had gone before. The records preserved of him are largely allegorical, and the simple man is plunged by them into a great sea of supernaturalism. This was not entirely without purpose, however, for as Shakespeare took license with history in order to present essential truths, so it seems that the historians of Jesus use the character of the man as the groundwork of a great drama. He becomes the hero of a seven seals story, and those Christians who have studied symbolism can gain from this story the key to the true Christian mysteries. They will then realize the scripture is perpetual history, that it pertains to no nation or people, but is the story of all nations and peoples. I know, Manly P. Hall. It is a wonderful thing, for example, to study the life of Christ in the light of astronomy, for he becomes a sun and his disciples the 12 signs of the zodiac. Among the constellations, we find the scenes of his ministry, and in the procession of the equinoxes, the story of his birth, growth, maturity, and death for men. Again, the tortured chemicals in the retort further reveal to us the life of the master, for with the key to chemistry, the scriptures become another book. In the particular work, however, we can only concern ourselves with the relationship of these allegories to the human body. We discovered that the life of Christ, as found in the Gospels, has been conventionalized until it agrees perfectly with the lives of dozens of world saviors, for all of them are also astronomical and physiological myths. All of these myths come to us out of the most remote antiquity, where the primitive races used the human body as a symbolic unit, and the gods and demons were personified out of the organs and functions of the body. Among certain Kabbalistic writers, the Holy Land is mapped out on the human body, and the various cities are shown as centers of consciousness in man. There is a wonderful study here for those who will investigate deeply and sincerely with ancient mysteries. We cannot hope to cover all of the ground, but if you can gain from this booklet a key from the situation, we hope you will pursue the line of thought until you have made it all inclusive and open at least one seal of the book of divine revelation. Part 2, the three worlds. According to the mystery schools, the human body is divided into three major parts. And in analogy with this, the universe without is said to be composed of three worlds: heaven, earth, and hell. Heaven is the superior world, and for some unknown reason is supposed to be above, although Ingersoll proved conclusively that owing to the rotation of the earth, up and down are always changing places. Nearly all religions teach that God dwells in the heavens. Their members are taught to believe that God is above them, so they raise their hands to prayer and lift their eyes to the heavens when they implore or petition him. Among some nations, he is supposed to dwell on the tops of mountains, which are the highest places of the world. Wherever he is and wherever he is, his place of domicile is above, overshadowing the world below. Between heaven above and hell beneath is the earth, which the Scandinavians call Midgard, or in the middle garden. It is suspended in space, and forms the dwelling place of men and other living creatures. It is connected to the heavens by a rainbow bridge, down which the gods descend. Its volcanic craters and fissures are said to connect it with hell, the land of darkness and oblivion, Muspelheim. Here, twixt heaven and earth dominion welding, as Goethe said, exists nature. The green grass, the flowing rivers, the mighty ocean exist only in the middle world, which is a sort of neutral ground, where the hosts of good and evil fight their eternal battle of Armageddon, or the Norse call it Ragnarok. And I'm adding stuff in there, guys, because I'm good at that. Below in the darkness and flames, torment and suffering is the world of hell, or in the Norse, Helheim, which we have interpreted as hell. It is the great beneath, for as surely as we think of heaven as up, we think of hell as down, while the middle place, earth, seems to be the dividing line between them. In hell are the forces of evil, the tearing, rendering, destroying powers, which are always bringing sorrow to the earth, and which struggle untiringly to overthrow the throne of the gods in heaven. The entire system is an anatomical myth. For the heaven world of the ancients, the domed temple on the top of the mountain was a skull with the divine contents. This is the home of the gods and men. It is termed up because it occupies the northern end of the human spine. The temple of the gods who rule the earth is said to be the North Pole, which also, by the way, is the home of Santa Claus, because the North Pole represents the positive end of the spinal column of the planetary lord. Santa Claus, coming down the chimney with his sprig of evergreen, the Christmas tree, at the season of the year when nature is dead, has a fine Masonic interpretation for this who wish to study it. The same is true of the manna that descended to feed the children of Israel in the wilderness, for this manna is a substance which comes down the spinal cord from the brain. The Hindus symbolize the spine as a stem of the sacred lotus. Therefore, the skull and contents are symbolized by the flower. The spinal column in Jacob's ladder connecting heaven and earth, while its 33 segments are the degrees of masonry, and the number of the years of the life of Christ. Up these segments, the candidate ascends in consciousness to reach the temple of initiation, located on the top of the mountain. It is in the dome room with a hole in the floor that the great mystery initiations are given. The Himalaya mountains rise above the earth, representing the shoulders and upper half of the body. They are the highest mountains of the world. Somewhere upon their summit stands the temple, resting, like the heavens of the Greeks, upon the shoulders of Atlas. It is interesting to note that the Atlas in the upper vertebra of the human spine, upon which the condyles of the skull rest. In the brain, there are a number of caves, ventricles, and folds, and are in them, according to Eastern legends, live the wise men, the yogis, and hermits. The caves of the yogis are said to be located in the head of the Ganges River. Every religion has its sacred river. To the Christians, it is the Jordan. To the Egyptians, it is the Nile. While to the Hindus, it is the Ganges. The sacred river is the spinal canal, which has its source among the peaks of the mountains. The holy men in their retreats represents the spiritual sight in the human brain and are 7 sleepers of the Quran, who must remain in the darkness of their caves until the spirit vitalizes them. The brain is the upper room referred to in the Gospels, where Jesus met with his disciples. And it is said that the disciples themselves represented the 12 convolutions of the brain. It is these 12 convolutions which later send their messages by means of the nerves into the body below to convert the genitals or preach the gospel in the middle earth. These 12 convolutions gather around the central opening in the brain, the third ventricle, which is the Holy of Holies, the mercy seat, where between the spreading wings of the angels, Jehovah talks with the high priest, and where both day and night the Shnikda's glory hovers. From this point, also, the spirit finally ascends from Golgotha, the place in the skull. It is a clairvoyant fact that the spirit not only leaves, but also enters the body through the crown of the head, probably giving rise to the story of Santa Claus and his chimney. Crown chakra. And we do leave our bodies when we sleep. Just a personal opinion. The Trinity in men lives in the 3 great chambers of the human body, from which they radiate their power throughout the 3 worlds. These centers are the brain, the heart, and the reproductive system. These are the 3 main chambers of the pyramid, and also the rooms in which are given the entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason degrees of the Blue Lodge Masonry. In these 3 chambers dwell the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are symbolized by 3-letter word, AUM. The transmutation, regeneration, and unfoldment of these 3 great centers result in a sounding of the lost word, which is the great secret of Masonic order. From the spinal nerves come impulses and life forces which make this possible. Therefore, the Mason is told to consider carefully his substitute word, which means the marrow of the bone. In the cerebrum, or posterior brain, which has charge of the motive system of the human body, and is only brain developed in the animal, is to be found a little tree-like growth, which has long been symbolized by a sprig of acacia, and as much as referred to in the Masonic allegory. The 2 lobes of the cerebrum, were called by the ancients Cain and Abel, and have much to do with the legend of the curse of Cain, which is literally the curse of unbalance. For the murder of the spirit of equilibrium, Cain is sent forth, a wanderer upon the face of the earth. I have in my possession a very remarkable skull, which originally rested on the shoulders of a homicide. It is of high organic quality, but bears the curse of Cain. This individual had a grudge, which he nursed very carefully. Nursed grudges sometimes becomes very dangerous things. This person swore that when he met a certain man, he would cut his heart out and throw it in his face. A number of years passed. His hatred grew, and at the last meeting his enemy, he attacked him and fulfilled his threat. He was hanged for the crime, but the skull bearing the testimony to the brain reveals a very interesting fact. The right half of the brain is under the control of Mercury, the planet of intelligence, and as a result of the crossing of the brain nerves At the base of the skull, it rules the left side of the body. The left half of the brain, under the control of Mars, the spirit of anger and impulse, rules the right side of the body. Likewise, the strong right arm. As the result of his hatred and the strong right arm, the rulership of Mars, which grew out of that hatred, the left rear side of the brain is fully twice the size of the right side. The individual allowed Mars to control his nature. Sorry, guys, my eyes are blurry. The impiety of Mars ruled him, and he paid with his life for the mark of Cain. Science knows there is a very narrow line between genius and insanity. For any dominating vice or virtue, man must pay with unbalance. Unbalance always distorts the viewpoint, and distorts viewpoints are unfailingly produced of misery. Oops. In the skull is the switchboard which controls the activities of the body. Every function of man below the neck is controlled by a center of consciousness in the brain. Proof of this is the fact that injury to certain centers of the brain results in paralysis of certain parts of the body. Medical science now knows that the spinal cord is an elongation of the brain, and some authorities even claim the cord to be capable of intelligence throughout the entire length. This cord is the framing sword which is supposed to have stood at the gate of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is in the skull, within which is a tree bearing 12 manner of fruit. The brain is filled with vaulted chambers and passageways, which have their correspondence in the spans of arches of the temples, while the third ventricle is undoubtedly the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. The spinal cord is the serpent of the ancients. In Central and South America, the savior god is called Quetzalcoatl. His name means leathered serpent. And this has always been his symbol. This is the brazen serpent raised by Moses in the wilderness. The 9 rattles on the tail of the serpent are called the number of man, and they represent the sacral and coccygeal bones, within whose centers the secret of human evolution is contained. Every organ of the physical body is reproduced in the brain, where it can be traced by the law of analogy. There are 2 embryonic human forms, one male and the other female, twist together in the brain. These are the yin and the yang of China, the black and the white dragons biting each other. One of these figures has its organ of expression, the pineal gland, and the other, the pituitary body. These 2 ductless glands are well worth consideration, for they are very important factors in the unfolding of human consciousness. It is known that these glands are larger and more active in higher grades of mentality than in those of lower quality, and in certain congenital idiots, they are very small. I hate that. I don't like that word. These 2 little glands are called the head and the tail of the dragon of wisdom. They are the copper and zinc poles of an electric circuit, which has the entire body as a battery. The pituitary body, which rests in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone, directly behind and just a little below the bridge of the nose, connected to the third ventricle by a tiny tube called guys, I took anatomy, and for the life of me, infundibulum is a female pole or negative center, which has charge of the expressions of physical energy. Its activity also regulates to a large degree the size and weight of the body. It is also a thermometer revealing disorder in any other of the chain of ductless glands. Endocrinology, the study of the ductless glands and their secretions, is still in its experimental stage, but someday it will be revealed as the most important of all medical sciences. The pituitary body is known under the following symbols by the ancient world: the alchemical retort, the mouth of the dragon, the Virgin Mary, the Holy Grail, the lunar crescent, the laver of purification, one of the cherubim of the ark, the Isis of Egypt, the Radha of India, and the fish's mouth. It may well be called the hope of glory of the physical man. At the opposite end of the third ventricle, and a little higher, is the pineal gland, which looks not unlike a pine cone, from which is secure its name. Sir Ernest Alfred Wallace Budge, keeper of the Egyptian antiquities in the British Museum, mentions in one of his works the Egyptian custom of trying pine cones on the tops of their heads. He states that in the papyrus rolls, these cones are fastened to the tops of the heads of the dead when taken into the presence of Osiris, lord of the underworld. Undoubtedly, this symbol referred to the pineal gland. It was also the custom of certain African tribes to fasten pieces of fat to the tops of the heads and allow them to melt in the sun and run down over them as a part of the religious observances. It is interesting that the American Indian should wear his feather, which was originally symbolic of spiritual perception, in the same place where the Christian monk shaves his head. The Hindus teach the pineal gland is a third eye called the eye of Dagma. It is called by the Buddhists the all-seeing eye and is spoken of in Christianity as the single eye. The eye single, sorry. There's my dyslexia, guys. We are told that the ages are the pineal gland was an organ of sense orientation by which man cognized the spiritual world, but that with the coming of the material senses and the two objective eyes, it ceases to be used, and during the time of the Lemurian race, retreated to its present position in the brain. It is said that children, recapitulating their previous periods of evolution, have a limited use of the third eye up to their 7th year, at which time the skull bones grow together. These accounts for the semi-clairvoyant condition of children who are far more sensitive than adults along psychic lines. The pineal gland is supposed to secrete an oil, which is called resin, the life of the pine tree. These word is said to be involved in the origin of the Rosicrucians. I'm trying, guys, who are working with the secretion of the pineal gland and seeking to open the eye single. For it is said in scripture, the light of my body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light. The pineal gland is the tail of the dragon and has a tiny finger-like protuberance at the end. This gland is called Joseph, for it is the father of the god man. The finger-like protrusions is called the staff of God, sometimes the holy spear. Its shape is like the evaporating vessel of the alchemist. It is a spiritual organ, which is later destined to be what it once was, namely a connecting link between the human and the divine. The vibrating finger on the end of this gland, the rod of Jesse, and the scepter of the high priest. Certain exercises, as given in the Haston and the Western mystery schools, cause this little finger to vibrate, resulting in a buzzing, droning sound in the brain. This is sometimes very distressing, especially when the individual who experiences this phenomenon in all too many cases knows nothing about the experience through which he is passing. In the middle of the brain and surrounded by the convolutions is the third ventricle, a vaulted chamber of initiation. Around it sit three kings, three great centers of life and power, the pituitary body, the pineal gland, and the optic thalamus. In the chamber also is a small gritty seed, which is undoubtedly connected with the king's coffer in the Great Pyramid. The third ventricle is supposed to be the seat of the soul, and the aura radiating from the heads of the saints and sages is said to represent the golden glow pouring from the third ventricle. Between the eyes and just above the root of the nose is a spreading in the frontal bone of the skull, which is called the frontal sinus. This slight bulge caused by the spreading of this bone is known to phrenology as the seat of individuality. It is here that the jewels are placed on the foreheads of the Buddhas, and it is also from this point that the serpent rose from the crown of the ancient Egyptians. Several of the mystery schools teach that this is the seat of Jehovah in the human body. While his function is through the generative systems, his center of consciousness as a part of the spirit of man is supposed to be located in a sea of blue ether called the veil of his, in the center of the frontal sinus. When clairvoyantly studying the body of the man, the little point always shows up as a black dot and cannot be analyzed. The Palatine Hill of the ancients, upon which were built the temples of Jupiter and Juno, also lays its place in the human body. The palate bone is a sort of hill-shaped structure, and right above it are the orbital cavities containing the two eyes, which are the Jupiter and Juno of the ancient world. The cross, of course, represents the human body. The upper limb of it is the head of man rising above the horizontal line of his outstretched arms. As already stated, the great churches and cathedrals of the world have been built in the form of a Isis and contained, where the head should be, the altar upon which arc burning lighted candles. These candles are symbolic of the spiritual sense centers in the brain, while the custom of placing a rose window over the altar suggests the soft place in the top of the skull. The skull, the upper room, is the sanctorium of the Masonic temple, and to it only the pure can aspire. The winged bone, which medical science knows as the sphygmoid, is the Egyptian scarab carrying in its claws the pituitary body, and also bearing aloft the gleaming spark of the immortality located in the frontal sinus. We are told in ancient mythologies that the gods came down from heaven and walked with men, instructing them in the arts and sciences. In a similar way, the godlike powers in man descended from the heaven world of his brain to carry on the work of constructing and reconstructing natural substances. We are told in that in the ultimate and evolution man's body will slowly be dissolved back again into the brain, which was its origin, until nothing remains but 7 globular centers radiating 7 perfect senses and perceptions, which are the spirits before the throne and the saviors which he is bringing into the world to redeem it through the 7 periods of his growth. Man is an inverted plant, gaining his nourishment from the sun as the sun does from the earth. As the life of the plant ascends to its stem to nourish its leaves and branches, so the life of man, rooted in the brain, descends to produce the same result. This life descending is symbolized as the world saviors who come down into the world to die for men. Later, these lives are returned again to the brain, where they glorify man before all the worlds of creation. So much for the story of the brain. Now let us consider the next of man's marvelous parts, namely the spinal column. Give me a second, guys. The spinal column. Connecting the 2 worlds, heaven above and the sphere of darkness below, is the spinal column, a chain of 33 segments protecting within them the spinal cord. This ladder of bones plays a very important part in the religious symbolism of the ancients. It is often referred to as a winding road or stairway. Sometimes it is called the serpent, at other times the wand or scepter. The Hindus teach that there are 3 distinct canals or tubes in the spinal system. They call them Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. Sorry, guys. I'm not good at that. These tubes connect the lower generative centers of the body with the brain. The Greeks symbolized them by the caduceus, or winged staff of Hermes. This consisted of a long rod, the central sushumna, which ended in a knob or ball, the pons of the medulla oblongata. On each side of this knob are wings arched over, used to represent the 2 lobes of the cerebrum. Up this staff and twisted around it wind 2 serpents, one black and the other white. These represent the Ida and Pingala. The ancient Hindus have a legend concerning the goddess Kundalini, in which it is said that she descended by means of the ladder or cord from heaven to a little island floating in the Great Sea. Connecting this with the embryology, it is evident that the ladder of the cord represents the umbilical cord, which the little island is the solar plexus. When the ladder is cut away from the heaven, the goddess flees in terror to a cave, sacral plexus, where she hides from the sight of men. Like Amaterasu, the Japanese goddess of the shining face, she must be lured from her cave. For the while she is there and refuses to come forth, the world is in darkness. Kundalini is the Sanskrit word meaning a serpentine or twisting gas or force. This force, so the Eastern sages claim, can be drawn up through the central spinal canal, the Sushumna. When this essence strikes the brain, it pens the center of the spiritual consciousness and inner perception. bringing with it spiritual illumination. The system of culture whereby this is made possible is the most secret teaching of the Eastern saints, for they realize that this spiral twisting force is not only illuminating, but like the serpent, which its symbol, also deadly poison. Smatterings of Eastern occultism are coming all the time into Western world, but we are sorry to say they are bringing with them endless suffering and sorrow. For these great truths in the hands of individuals incapable of rightly understanding or applying them destroy intelligence and reason. Along the spine are a number of nerve ganglia and plexus. All of these have their place in religious symbolism. For example, we are told that early Jews called the sacral plexus and the syncogranial ganglion the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. There is a small plexus in the region of the kidneys called the sagittal plexus, which the ancients knew as the city of Tarsus, where St. Paul fought with the beasts. Higher occultism teaches that the lotus blossom nerve centers of the spine are reflections or negative poles bearing witness of 7 great positive centers of consciousness located in the brain. These 7 function through the centers of the spine in approximately the same way that the 7 spirits before the throne function through the planetary bodies. The disciple is warned not to work with the centers upon the spine, but to labor instead with their true rulers, the centers of the brain. The wanderings of the wanderings of the children of Israel in the wilderness, the pilgrimage of the Mohammedan up to Mecca, the endless pilgrimages of Hindu holy men who spent their lives going from one shrine to another represents the pilgrimage of the spirit fire kundalini through the nerve centers along the spine. By certain specifications, force is turned into these centers one after the other until, when seen clairvoyantly, they are great flower-like areas from which light rays stream the petals. Each of these lotus blossoms have different number of petals according to the number of nerves which branch out from it. It is said that the Logos, when the time came to create the material universe, entered a state of deep meditation, centralizing his thought power upon the 7 flower-like centers of the 7 worlds. Gradually, his life force descended from the brain, which was the great superior world, and striking these flowers, one after the other, wave birth to the lower worlds. When at last his spirit fire struck the lowest center of the physical world was created, and his fire was at the base of the spine. When the world returns to him again, and he once more becomes supreme in consciousness, it will be because he withdraws the life from these 7 centers, beginning with the lowest, and returns it again to the brain. Thus, the path of evolution for all living things is to raise this fire, whose descent made their manifestations in the lower worlds possible, and whose raising being brings them into harmony once more with superior worlds. This myth of the life force that came down and took upon itself worlds is found among all the civilized nations of the earth. This is the Harem Abif, who built the Masonic temple, the bodies, and was there slain by the 3 vehicles which he formed. This is likewise the Christ slain for the sins of the world. Because of the fact that the spinal fire is a twisting serpent force, the snake has been used in all parts of the world to represent the world saviors. The Eucharist, worn by the Egyptian priests upon their foreheads, was a symbolic of the Kundalini and sacred cobra, who, when she was raised in the wilderness, saved all who gazed upon her. Moses and the brazen serpent. As the brain is the center of the divine world, so the solar plexus is the center of the human world. For representing semi-consciousness, it links the unconsciousness below with the consciousness above. Man is not only capable of thinking with his brain, he is capable of certain phase of thought through the nerve centers of the solar plexus. It will probably be wise at this point to describe the difference between a medium and a clairvoyant. To the average person, there is no difference, but to the mystic, these two phases of spiritual sight are separated by the entire span of human evolution. Let's see. A clairvoyant is one who has raised the spinal serpent into he brain, and by his growth earned the right of perceiving the invisible worlds with the aid of the third eye or pineal gland. This organ of consciousness, which millions of years ago connected man with the invisible worlds, closed during the Lemurian period when the objective senses began to develop. The occultist, however, by the process of developed, hinted before, may reopen the eye by the means of explore the invisible worlds. Clairvoyants are not born, they are made. Mediums are not made, they are born. It's true. The clairvoyant can become such only after years, sometimes lives, of self-preparation. On the other hand, the medium, by sitting in the darkened room or by other similar practices, may secure results in a few days. Side note, pause. I'm very curious to read this because I'm both. And I agree with that to an extent. The medium uses the solar plexus as a mirror, and upon its sensitive nerves are reflected pictures recorded in invisible ethers. Through the spleen, which is the gateway to the etheric body, the medium permits decarnate intelligences to come into his spiritual constitution, the result being voices and other spirit manifestations. Automatic writing is gained by permitting the etheric arm of an outside intelligence to control temporarily the physical arm of the medium. This is not possible until the medium removes his etheric double from the arm, for two things cannot occupy the same place at the same time. The process of periodically separating life forces from the physical arm is very dangerous, often resulting in paralysis. Mediumship is unnatural to man, while clairvoyance is the natural result of growth and the unfolding of the spiritual nature. There are 100 mediums to one clairvoyant. Wow. Wow, I'm just mind blown by this. There are 100 mediums to one clairvoyant, but the clairvoyant can become such only through self-mastery and the exertion of tremendous power, while the weaker, the more sickly, and the more nervous an individual is, the better medium he makes. Gosh. The clairvoyant is unfolding his mind by filling it with useful knowledge, while the first instruction given, that would be medium, is make your mind a blank. The reason mediumship, though, the reason mediumship through the solar plexus is a retrogression may be summed up as follows. The group spirits who control the destinies of the animal kingdoms govern them, then charges through pictures thrown against the solar plexus, for the animal has no self-conscious mind. As a result, instead of thinking with its own brain, it thinks with the brain of the group spirit to whom it is attached by invisible magnetic cords. These cords convey their impressions and photograph them upon the sympathetic nervous system. Having no will of its own, the animal is incapable of combating these urges and consequently obeys them implicitly. Man governs himself through the cerebrospinal nervous system because he has developed an individuality, and the sympathetic system no longer rules him. Opening himself to impulses through the solar plexus area, the medium is thwarting his own growth by preventing the cerebral spinal nervous system from controlling his destiny. Man has always liked to learn and external things. He hates to face each problem and solve it with his brain God gave him. He consequently leans on the invisible worlds, asking them to help him to accomplish the labors which he should do by his own efforts. Thousands of people must carry the karmic responsibilities of the medium, for many follow this calling because hundreds of people want to talk to deceased relatives or get inside tips on the stock exchange. Those who, by their patronage, encourage things of which they do not themselves approve are personally responsible for the injury which their selfishness has thus permitted other persons to inflict upon themselves. Oh my gosh. No. To some extent, yes, but no. The difference, therefore, between mediumship and clairvoyance is about half the length of the spinal column. It is the difference between negative and positive. It is the difference between the midnight of the seance room and the noonday of the temple. Okay. Pause, press pause. Okay. From when this was written until now, there was a lot of spiritual people who have either one or the other, and a lot of people only have one or the other. There are many of us who have both abilities. And that's not to say that there are people who scam or suck the money and life out of people, out of their losing someone. And yes, you can talk to spirit, but that's to heal and not to make light of the book or the whatever, the paper. It's a healing tool. It's one that it's not for everybody to go to a medium, and it's not for everybody to scam. But I find this really interesting. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, my. All of the organs which the body of man have their religious significance. The heart with its chambers is itself a temple, standing upon the mountain of the diaphragm. The spleen, with its little umbrella-shaped body, collects the sun's rays and has charge of the etheric body. It is the etheric body coiled within the spleen that injects the white blood corpuscles into the circulatory system. We know that the human body has been inspiration for nearly all mechanical contrivances. Hinges are copied from the human body, likewise die, ball, and socket joint. We are told that the first plumbing was reproduced from the arterial and venous circulatory systems. Hundreds of machines and implements have been inspired by the subtle workings of our own vehicles, for the human body is the most marvelously constructed machine that the human mind can study. This close relationship between the generative system below mill, the brain above, for the brain is a positive generating system, is of course due to the spine connecting them. At certain time, a number of little doors, which now separate the brain from the generative system, are open, and the sushumna becomes an open tunnel, so that every impulse is carried immediately to both ends of the body. It is for this reason that the candidate assumes the vows of celibacy, for the close connection existing in the advanced discipline between the brain and the reproductive system necessitates an absolute conservation of the all life energies. The tonsils are directly connected with the generative system. In fact, they are part of the positive pole in the brain. The customs of vaccinating healthy children and cutting out normal tonsils on general principles should be reconsidered. Most tonsils are infected as the result of the child eating too many sweets during the first years of life. The moral is, don't cut out the tonsils, cut out the sweets. Many parents are responsible for the illnesses of their children. Through either ignorance or indulgence, they allow the infantile consciousness, as yet controlled by its higher vehicle, to destroy itself before life barely begins. When children are sick during the early years of life, the physicians will often find the cause of the ailment in the parent and the father or mother, not the child, should be dosed with pills. If the stomach is kept in proper condition, the tonsils will give very little trouble. The absolute economy exhibited by nature in the building of its structures should be sufficient proof that the Lord was not wasting his time when he made tonsils and an appendix. He apparently had reason for making them, but these poor, offending organs have become a goldmine in medical scientists who remove them at the slightest provocation. We are told that the vertical position assumed by the human body, which forces the contents of the intestinal tract to travel part of the time uphill, is the reason for the appendix, which is missing in creatures of horizontal carriage. Every organ not only has its visible purpose, but also an invisible spiritual purpose. And the individual is to be admired who manages to go through life preserving intact as many as possible of his original anatomical parts and members. While on the subject of the debt of science to the human body, we might add that the decimal system is the result of the primitive man's counting of his fingers, whereby 10 become the unit of enumeration. The ancient cubit also was distance between the elbow and the end of the second finger, or approximately 18 inches. So it goes back through the study of things until we find that nearly everything which man has surrounded himself is the adaptation from the body with which God surrounded the spirit. Man is gradually gaining control not only over the organs of his body, but also over their functions. Science states that certain organs function automatically or mechanically, but occultism realizes that there is nothing mechanical about the functions of the human body. Let us take as an example a workman throwing a piece of iron among the wheels and levers of a smoothly working machine. There is a grinding crash and the machine stops. If, on the other hand, you figuratively throw a monkey wrench into the human body, it will immediately begin the process of throwing it back at you. It will surround the foreign element with a coating and try to absorb it. If this is impossible, it will try to eject it through some channel appointed for that purpose. If this means fails, it will, in many cases, accustom itself to the presence of the obstacle and keep right on working away. This shows unmistakably that the organic parts of man possess some inherent form of intelligence. Therefore, they are not machines, for a mechanical device is capable of intelligence. Paracelsus, the great Swiss physician, who after many years in the Far East returned to Switzerland to teach medicine, first gave to the European world its concepts of the nature spirits. He taught that the functions of nature were under the control of little creatures who were invisible to the normal senses, but who, working through the kingdoms of life, minerals, plants, animals, and parts of the human body, kept all of these evolving in an intelligent way. Under the control of the great cerebral hierarchy of Scorpio, which has charge of all body building in nature, these elements are invisible intelligence governing the human body and its functions. Bacteria. As a result of man's ever-evolving consciousness, he is acquiring more complete control over the functions of his various organs. There are two kinds of muscles, voluntary and involuntary, the difference being that the voluntary muscles, which are controlled by the conscious mind of the individual, have fibers running two ways and crossing each other, while those whose are involuntary are without cross fibers. The heart used to be considered an involuntary muscle, but it is now beginning to show cross fibers, thus foreshadowing the day when man will consciously and intelligently regulate the beating of his own heart. The same will be true with respect to all other organs that survive the periodic changes taking place in the constitution of man. The Eastern holy man can successfully live without his heart beating. He can stop it or start it at will by lifting the tongue so that it closes the air passages in the lungs. He can remain in suspended animation for months. Many Eastern Chiles do this while being given spiritual initiations out of the physical body. There are cases on record where these holy men have been buried in the ground. Weeks later, when the body was dug up, it was found to be dried like leather. Water was pouring onto it, and after a certain lapse of time, the men who had not taken a breath in weeks got up and walked off. This is the result of extraordinary control which the mind is capable of gaining over the function of the body. Occultism teaches that there is an entire universe within the body, that it has its worlds, its planes, and its gods and goddesses. Millions of minute cells are in its inhabitants. These tiny creatures are grouped together into kingdom, nations, and races and become the one thing composed of many parts. The supreme ruler and God of this great world is the consciousness in man which says, I am. This consciousness picks up its universe and moves to another town. Every time it walks up and down the street, it takes 100 million solar systems with it. But because they are so infinitesimal, men cannot realize that they are actually worlds. In like manner, we are individual cells in the body of infinite creation, which is hurling itself through infinity at unknown speed. Suns, moons, and stars are merely bones in a great skeleton composed of all the substances of the universe. Our own little lives are merely part of the infinite life, throbbing and coursing through the arteries and veins of space. But all this is so vast as to be beyond the comprehension of this little I am in us. Therefore, we may say that both extremes are equally incomprehensible. We live in a middle world between infinite greatness on the one hand and infinite smallness on the other. As we grow, the world grows also, resulting in corresponding increase in the scope of our understanding of all those world wonders. So I'm going to leave it here. My goodness. Comment below what, if anything, resonated with you. A lot has resonated with me, for sure. The medium and the clairvoyant part, yes. And again, the chakras and stuff, I find very interesting. So definitely, if this resonated with you, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe. Next time, I'm going to read the Infernal Worlds. I'm making myself a note because, again, I'm reading off of a PDF, like the Keys of Enoch. And I need to remember where I left off. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Sorry for the mispronunciations. It's okay. One day I'll have regular teeth and I'll be able to eat normal food. Yep. I don't have back teeth. So I hope you enjoyed Manly P. Hall. I sure did. It's very interesting. It's not for everybody. Again, this is another perception and another opinion and another part of the paradigm that we need to at least read and recognize and open our minds up to. This is interesting. It's talking about the body. It's talking about a lot of different concepts and things that we see every day in religion and in our world that we might have not comprehended before, but now this gives a little bit of a clearer view on where some of these principles and symbols come from. So with that, sending each and every one of you love and light. I hope to get some sleep. It's 2:30 in the morning here. Fourth video of my time-lapse day. Again, if you can help me out, that'd be a great thing. Even a thumbs up helps. All my information will be linked down below. I hope you have a great night. Open mind. New perceptions. Take it in. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye.